Hi, friend. Hello, Alex from MetaMind Music coming at you with another video today. I hope everyone's doing well. Happy 420, whatever that means to you. Some people celebrate with astro flowers, but it's 420 2020 at 2000 hours. So that's a lot of 20s. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyways, before today's video actually is about the 5 things you must have, in my opinion, to have a home studio, a functioning home studio at the maximum capacity with the least amount of things. 5 things. Before we dive in though, I want to give you my free Workflow Wizardry PDF, which is a simple framework to help you take your song from your first ideas all the way to a finished product, going through the developing your ideas, arranging your song, editing your song, mixing and mastering. It's all in the PDF, so you can get it in the description below, or you can get it at metamindmusic.com/workflow. So the first thing that you need in your home studio is, wait for it, a computer. So in today's modern, unless you're going to be cutting tape and recording to tape with a mixing console, you're going to need a computer. So to make music, you don't actually need that powerful of a computer. Most entry-level laptops that have, you know, a decent processor and 4 gigs of RAM to 8 gigs of RAM, that will be enough to get you started. Like, you can get started on pretty much any kind of computer. That story will change if you get more advanced into processing and mixing and mastering. And the more and more computer power you need, the stronger computer you'll need. Typically, if you want a computer that will last a long time and will kind of suffice for all of your audio processing needs and mixing needs, 16 gigs of RAM is a good place to aim for. Beyond just your computer to get started, you will also need some software. In other words, a DAW, which means Digital Audio Workstation. And this is the software in which you're going to record your audio, you're going to edit your audio, and you're going to mix it down and basically get all of your sounds in one place to finally get the last track that you're going to share with people to have your finished song. And all of this happens inside your computer, inside the software. And to get started, some computers actually come with some software. I think MacBooks come with GarageBand. And there's another software called Reaper, which is a fully featured DAW that is completely free to download, to at least try. And it's like you can actually keep renewing the trial period for as long as you need to. So there's no excuse not to get started. Both those softwares will get you started making music. But the key point is you need something. You need something to be able to get your audio in and be able to play around with it and then start to get your creative juices flowing. And that leads me into the second thing that you need in your home studio is you need an interface or a sound card, which is basically an external device that connects to your computer, usually via USB, but there's Thunderbolt, there's FireWire. But basically, it's an external device that connects to your computer that processes all of the sound incoming and outcoming. So if you're trying to record guitars in or microphones into your computer, this card will do it, and it also processes all the audio that's being played back to you. So what it does is it effectively takes all of that strain and computing effort off of your computer, which reduces your latency and increases the quality of your audio when it plays back. And it's also a requirement if you plan to be recording any external instruments, such as acoustic guitars, electric guitars, basses, microphones, or any kind of percussions that you'll use your microphones to capture. Any kind of external audio that you want to bring into your computer has to be done through an interface. And these range from super cheap interfaces that maybe run like $60 to $80, which is just the bare minimum, where you can plug in your headphones, you can plug in external monitors, you can plug in your guitar, and it's very easy, simple, and straightforward to get started. But these also range to super advanced interfaces that have a lot of processing power, and even some of them have internal plugins and crazy routing options. So you could feed different inputs into your interface and then route them out to outboard gear such as compressors or synthesizers, or do some reamping and then bring it back into an interface. So it can get pretty crazy, and you can have like a whole MIDI universe set up through your interface. But to get started, you can get a pretty cheap one. I think Focusrite makes Scarlett 2i2s or Scarlett Solos, which are very cost effective and good to get started. And as well as having an interface, I would suggest that you get either headphones or external monitors, such as the ones you see there, the HS8s. And this is just to make your listening experience a lot more enjoyable when you're recording music and producing music. And it's also going to represent and make you better able to hear the full spectrum of frequencies. Because if we're listening through like the speakers that come with your computer, obviously the range that they'll be able to represent is very small, so you won't actually be able to get any bass or any like definition in your high end frequencies. Or if you're getting like speakers that are like, let's say for a sound system, right, like something you would be playing to like at a party or at a club, these speakers like enhance the bass and they enhance the sound in certain ways, which is great for the application of a party, but it's not great for the application of creating music or mixing music, because it will effectively bias the frequencies you hear based upon what the speaker is shaped to be producing. When you get headphones or you get studio monitors, what they do, they're typically tailored to be more of a flat response, so that it actually reproduces the frequencies in a flat way so that you can accurately perceive them as you're making it. Because if you're making music with speakers that, let's say, for example, don't recreate the low end, the bass at a proper level, you might overcompensate or undercompensate depending on what your speakers push out based upon what you're hearing, right? And you think, oh, this sounds awesome, but then you export it to share, or you show it, or you listen to it in your car or something, and it's like, wow, this is so much different than when I heard it. So that is super important. You don't need both, but you can even just get a cheap pair of overhead headphones that represent the bass, and that's good enough. It'll have a flat enough response. And as you get used to it and listen to it more and more, you'll understand how they recreate the sound. So number 3 on this list, and I think this is a must-have, is you must have a MIDI controller. You must have a keyboard. That's typically the entry-level instrument or MIDI controller you would see, because piano can play the bass parts, it can play harmonies, it can play chords, and it can also play melodies. It can also play drum beats. Like you can map drums to your keys and play drums. So if you're just getting started, getting a MIDI keyboard, you can play all the instruments you would need to get a whole song created and a whole song arranged. But the reason why I suggest getting a MIDI controller in the first place over just clicking with your mouse and programming all the music is because you don't want to program music. You don't want to think music in existence, because for me personally, this feels very detached from the organic connection you have through playing an instrument, even if it's just like not a crazy performance, but even just vibing out on a synthesizer or a bass line and playing it in with a keyboard, and then you go in and edit it to where you want it to be. But having that initial connection of playing something and vibing with it is completely different than trying to vibe with clicking a mouse and programming in a beat, because a lot of music that gets created in that fashion, meaning only with a mouse and clicking and programming, it sounds that way. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, you've probably heard music like this yourself, and some people, that might be the music they want to create, and that's great. But I personally would encourage you to, like, if you want to create music that's even super technically locked into a grid, that you have a little bit of input with an instrument, right, to play in parts, at least before you start quantizing it. Because if you don't have that little bit of play going in, it's going to sound robotic, and it's going to sound like a computer made it, because the computer did make it. Because every time you program with a mouse and click on and off, it's binary decisions. It's yes or no, up, I want this on or off, I want this thing to be a note here or not a note here. And it's very, very like binary decision making, as opposed to if you just play something and you're jamming, it's creative decision making, right? It might not be perfect, but at least you're tapping into something that's more than just your analytical mind. And I think that's super important. So that's why I'm going to harp on this point a lot. And you can get MIDI controllers that are super simple, like super cost effective. That's like a small keyboard that gets you started. Or you can get ones that have drum pads, or you can get drum pads that are separate. And like what I have, if you can see, is like a giant drum pad that can take the form of anything. And I just really like having tools like this because it helps you interact with the software, right? Like I don't like personally interacting with music software with a mouse and always clicking menus and going into menus and adjusting stuff with the mouse. I'd rather play with knobs. I'd rather touch stuff and hit buttons and make that interact with the software. And it really changes the way you approach making music when you start to incorporate workflows like this, because it doesn't feel like, oh, I got to be a studio nerd and understand all this stuff. It feels like you're just utilizing the software as an extension of your musical creativity. And that's where we want to get to, right? So that's enough of that point. I've harped on it enough. The next point is you're going to need, the next requirement in your list is instruments. And this could be physical or virtual instruments. If you play an instrument, that's great. If you play piano, maybe you should get a synthesizer, or maybe you could have an electric piano because you're used to playing it. Or if you play guitar, get your electric guitars, get some acoustic guitars or bass, or even if it's just like extra percussion stuff. Like I have a tambourine in the corner of my room and like this little kind of shitty flute, and I don't really record it that often, but anything can be used as an instrument if you're creative enough, right? And the more kind of things you have to inspire you as real instruments will infuse kind of a unique style, a unique realness into your tracks, as opposed to everything being generated in a computer. And then you can always adjust it later to fit the sound that you're going for. And this can also, if you don't have physical instruments, or maybe don't have the dexterity yet to be playing physical instruments, you can always get software instruments where you could, let's say, have a program that sounds like a real acoustic bass, but you're playing it with your MIDI keyboard, right? Or if you're getting a pack of like drum kits of how a real drum kit sounds, you can play it with your MIDI keyboard, and then the sound will be generated from your computer. So it's just to basically have enough instruments to cover the general palette of sounds that you want to use to make your music. And you might only need a certain amount of sounds to get started. Like if you know you're getting, or if you know you want to create only a certain genre of music, or you really know what instruments you need to get your vision together, then just make sure you get something that covers those bases to get started. And then you should be able to create a track from start to finish and align with your vision. And as you progress more and more, you can kind of add to that collection and add to your choices and options in making sounds. There's so many choices today, and free options too. Like you don't even have to open your or get out your wallet to find good software instruments. There's like free synths, there's free drum programs, there's free bass programs, there's guitar simulators, plugins, mixing plugins, all for free online these days. So if you just give a little search on the Google, you'll be able to find some awesome tools that'll get you started. And that also leads into the last and final requirement is some samples. And this really depends on what kind of music you're making, because if you're making like band music or rock, metal, R&B, something that's very instrument and vocal based, you might not need samples unless you're not a vocalist. And this is, I sometimes record myself singing, for example, but I typically would use somebody else's vocals, or I would use samples, right? I would use samples, vocals, and then you can take those and add vocals to your tracks if you wanted vocals in your tracks. And just having at least a little bit of a library of whether it be vocal samples or pads and even whatever drum loops, it could be a small library, but sometimes it can really help you get started getting creative. And you can also take samples and you can adjust them, you can play them, you can chop them up and move them around, or you could just use it as a scaffolding. And this is a little technique I like to use, is like if you're kind of struggling coming up with creative ideas, basically get a drum loop, get something that really gets you inspired, throw it in your DAW, and then use that as a bass line to jam out some ideas. So like throw a drum beat in there and then get out a bass, or throw a drum beat in there and get a bass in your software instrument and play it with your keyboard and just jam along to this drum beat. And then maybe add a second layer to your bass line in that drum beat. And then take out the drum beat and then you use that sample effectively as a scaffolding to start other ideas off. And then you could maybe program a drum beat and continue going from your own creative input other than samples. But there's nothing inherently wrong with using samples, and it cannot hurt to have it in your back pocket. And you can see how having some samples, especially vocal samples if you're not a vocalist, can really help you finish a song, get a song in a complete form if you want songs with vocals on them. And that's it. That's my 5 must-have things to start your home studio. If you have even just the entry level of those 5 things, you'll see that the creative range of things that you could create in your home studio is limitless, and you'll be able to go through all the steps of the process, including mixing, including editing, including tracking and arranging. All these things will be done with all the tools that we've mentioned in these steps. So that's all I have for you today. If you haven't already, I encourage you to pick up the Workflow Wizardry PDF that I have in the description below, or at metamindmusic.com/workflow. It's a free PDF and it's super simple. It's just a framework that will help you take your ideas. You have a couple riffs, you have a couple musical phrases, you even maybe just have a drum beat, and it'll help you massage that into a few more ideas and bring it through the steps towards completion. And it's super simple, super straightforward. I want you to have it for free. So go ahead and pick that up. And if anyone has any questions before I leave, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And if you have a question after the fact, after this live session ends, just throw them in the comments below and I'll come back and answer them at a later time. Yes, Riff Bear, thank you. Actually, I'm just getting started with these live streams, so I'm working out the bugs and trying to not totally freeze up on camera. So as I get more familiar with this, I plan to be streaming these screens in my DAW software, and I'm going to dive deeper into subjects such as sound design or recording. I might do a live stream of me going through a mix and kind of just start ducktailing into doing live, more visual stuff where you can follow along and explaining concepts instead of just a talking head for now. But also, if you have any specific questions that you'd want me, or any specific concepts you want me to cover in the DAW, just drop me a line and I'll make a note of it. And I'll for sure cover it in a future video. So thanks for the comment, man. Yeah, sweet. And yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any more questions. So thank you everybody for showing up. I'm excited to see you guys again, and I'll leave you until next time.